It was a quiet Monday morning, just before dawn, when the unsettling event unfolded. The sun had barely started to rise, casting faint shadows across the kitchen floor. The house was silent, everyone still tucked away in bed, except for one, their young son. At 7 a.m., like every other school day, the boy was preparing for the day ahead, packing his lunch quietly in the dim kitchen. No one was awake to witness the strange events that would soon send chills through the household. The boy stood alone, the soft clink of his lunchbox the only sound in the otherwise empty space. But then, out of nowhere, an ear-piercing scream erupted, so gut-wrenching it shattered the stillness of the morning. His mother, startled awake by the sound of her child's terror, immediately bolted upright in bed, her heart racing. The sound of his voice echoed through the house like a distress call, primal and raw. She rushed toward her son's screams, and when she reached him, her blood ran cold. His face was pale, eyes wide with panic. Before she could ask what was wrong, he had already hurled himself into her bedroom, diving into her bed, shaking uncontrollably. His words tumbled out in a frantic mess, barely coherent, as he clung to her tightly. Through his gasps for breath, he told her of a voice that had come from the kitchen cabinets, clear as day, asking him, "How did you find me?" At that moment, he had dropped everything. Noodles spilling across the floor. The fear had gripped him so violently that he couldn't even think straight. The child had bolted up the stairs, charging into his mother's room, convinced that someone, or worse, something, had been in the house with him. The mother tried to calm him, pulling him close, but his panic was infectious. And then, before they could even catch their breath, they both heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and heavy, each step louder than the last as they climbed the staircase. The sound wasn't distant. It was unmistakably inside the house, getting closer by the second. Terrified, she sprang into action. Grabbing her robe, shoved her son into the room with his brothers and slammed the door behind her, praying that it was enough to keep whatever was out there away from them. What was most chilling wasn't just the sound of those footsteps or the eerily clear voice that had spoken to her son. It was that no one else had been in the house at the time. Every family member had been accounted for, still asleep upstairs. But the video footage captured something more. The camera recorded the whole ordeal, and when the mother reviewed it, she heard something she could never have expected. A voice, clear and unmistakable, echoing through the kitchen. Yet it wasn't a familiar voice. It wasn't anyone in the family. As she watched, a knot of dread settled in her chest. The voice on the footage perfectly matched what her son had described. The same eerie words. "How did you find me?" With no explanation for the voice or the heavy footsteps that followed, the family was left questioning whether they had truly been alone that morning. Was it an intruder? Or, as some now believed, something far more inexplicable? The mother's terror wasn't only for herself, but for her son. The way he had screamed, pure fear ripping through his small body. That scream, she would later confess, was the most horrifying part of all. And in the days to come, it would haunt her every time she closed her eyes, wondering if whatever had visited their home that morning would one day return.